Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to put my shows this week into a little bit of perspective if I could. Today, I've got Leah Taylor-Roy, who is one of the most impressive members of Parliament I've had the pleasure of meeting and interacting with. She has got a incredible educational background, Harvard Kennedy School. She went to McKinsey and was a senior consultant with them, rising through the ranks of McKinsey. And then she went and worked as a CEO of an energy company. And then she wanted to go back to her roots in North Toronto and where her father was the mayor and run as a member of parliament. She ran once and lost, but only by a small margin, kept at it and ran again and won again a third time or a second time. Really an impressive individual, a long career in business, and now dedicating herself to public service. I think it's very admirable. She's just recently come back from a major conference on women's issues, women's rights in Africa, and we talked a lot about reproductive issues, but on also a lot of other issues in regards to women's rights, education, employment, roles in government, etc. We talk about quotas, we talk about affirmative action. It's a really good, wide-ranging discussion from someone who has dealt with these issues her whole life. And she's probably comparable to my age. And so she's really had a long career and a very in-depth one in business and now in government. Yesterday, I had an interview with Naomi Illiworth, who is Métis, and I interacted with her, met her when I was in Edmonton recently and invited to an event at Fort Edmonton, which is really quite a spectacular historic fort in the middle of a ravine in the middle of Edmonton. And in it is an Indigenous Peoples Experience Center. Naomi was the narrator at the end of the tour of a movie about residential schools. And number one, she spoke about the residential schools and brought them to life. And then number two, she talked about her own personal experience, where her grandfather was a teacher as a residential school and had an issue where he had to object to some people working at the school, given that he thought that they were doing inappropriate things. And it really brought the whole residential school issue home to me. And we also talked about the Truth and Reconciliation process and commission, and we also talked about murdered and missing women and girls. It really came to me that we need to be more exposed personally to some of these issues and some of the people that are impacted by these issues, so that we can more adequately, more properly, more completely understand what our Indigenous brothers went through, our Indigenous sisters went through, and what our churches, what our governments, what our institutions did to these people. It's just atrocious. And so I think that was really interesting. On Wednesday, I've got Carolyn Witzman, who's a professor, a housing expert, talking about housing affordability, and the role the federal government's got to play. She recently wrote a very powerful article about that this should be job one for all governments, including the federal government. And I really think, and I've spent a lot of time talking about affordable housing on the show, Carolyn has got a really interesting view on this. On Friday, I've got Maria Almansani. She calls herself the toxic dating coach. She is an interesting individual. I said to her that I thought her views were more conservative, more traditional, and she said no, that she actually is very liberal because she believes that same-sex couples have as much right as anyone else to have male and female kind of roles. She firmly believes in the masculine and the feminine. She thinks that too often society in Canada tries to influence all females to play a certain role, when she says some females, particularly immigrant females, don't want to play those roles. And so she's more accepting of and argues to us that we need to be more accepting of different roles. It's an interesting argument. Sorry, that's on Friday. On Thursday, I've got Amanda Vos, who is a founder and CEO of a waste to energy company in the UK, very active in Africa. And we talk about waste to energy. We talk about climate change. We talk about different types of waste to energy solutions. We talk about garbage. We talk about unemployment in Africa. We talk about the lack of power, and that waste to energy may be the solution to that. And then we also talk about her career, because she similarly has had a really interesting entrepreneurial career where she started out at the age of 14 as a textile manufacturer, a fashion designer, a retailer of women's fashions, and grew that to a multi-million-dollar business, and then grew a property company, and then grew a telecom company before launching her waste to energy company. And in the interim, having a fun time living the life in London, England. So I've got 5 different females this week talking about a range of different topics, from Naomi talking about Indigenous reconciliation, Leah Taylor-Roy talking about women's issues, Carolyn Weitzman talking about housing affordability crisis, Amanda Vos talking about waste to energy and alternative energy, and Maria Elmasani talking about the interaction between male and female. So it's an interesting week. Last week I had 5 gentlemen, and it started with Jamie Watt, who's founder, chairman of Navigator Limited, who pens an article, a column every week in the Toronto Star. And what he did is he published a book on what I wish I had said, which is a sort of a postmortem on what he got right, what he got wrong in all of his prior columns, which is an interesting thing for a columnist to do. Then I had Mike Moffat, a professor at Ivy and also in Ottawa, talking about housing affordability and a lot of the issues associated with government regulation and things that are impacting our lack of affordable housing. And then I had a really interesting interview with Shirish Nadkarni, a really smart tech guy from Silicon Valley, talking about online marketplaces and how they've morphed from just being places where you list opportunities to buy things to where Uber and other people make recommendations to buy and actually connect you up with the seller, to today where AI might actually consummate the purchase opportunity for us. It's a fascinating book that he's written on online marketplaces, and a good conversation about it. Alid Ab-Iroth, the deputy chief economist from CMHC, talking about housing affordability and the crisis, and some of the work that StatsCan and CMHC has done that suggests that the time that it takes local governments to approve housing is the biggest reason why we have a lack of affordability. Restrictions are an issue, but he says the time. StatsCan says the time. And he says that the Greater Toronto Area, other than Vancouver and Victoria, have the worst records in all of Canada. And Southwestern Ontario and some of the suburban cities outside of the 905 are 30 to 50% faster in approvals and are 50% cheaper. And he says there's a direct correlation. Not sure if there's a causation, but believe me, I believe there's a causation, but a correlation between red tape and how long it takes to get projects approved and the lack of housing affordability. And it comes back to my contention that local government and NIMBYism that influences local government, and local government that doesn't have the backbone to stand up to that NIMBYism, has caused a dramatic reduction in supply, a dramatic increase in the cost of construction and development, and has harmed us all, and particularly the most vulnerable, newcomers, young people, renters that want to become owners. We have a moral crisis in this country today because local politicians, local governments, local planning people are putting in place a regulatory red tape system that has made housing unaffordable for the vast majority of people. And then I end the week with Dennis Mills, who for 16 years was a member of parliament from the Beaches, Danforth, actually, I think, in parliament. And 20 years ago, just last month, 2 weeks ago, was the anniversary of the Rolling Stones SARS concert that he was the key person in organizing, that really brought 500,000 people to Downsview Park to tell the world that Toronto was back open again after SARS. And we talk a lot not only about that concert, but about the way that government and different people and different political parties work together for the benefit of all. And he thinks that collaboration, cooperation, cross-party conversation has diminished dramatically. And he ends his interview with me with a call for support for Olivia Chow. And it's interesting because, he competed against Jack Layton. That was the same riding, Toronto Danforth. And he's got a ton of respect for Olivia Chow, and more importantly, a ton of respect for the challenge that the new mayor of Toronto was facing with budget problems, et cetera. And he calls for provincial and federal governments, the prime minister and the premier, to sit down with Olivia Chow to try to address Toronto's biggest issues. So that was my 2 weeks. 5 guys last week, 5 females this week, talking about a whole range of fascinating issues, from housing to Indigenous rights to women's rights to marketplaces to waste to energy to dating. I love having these conversations. I hope you get to check in and check some of them out sometime. Have a great week, everybody.